ways to do that. I'm going to hand over to Peter and leave it up to him to continue the night. At the end of this session, at 7 o'clock, I'll come back up to say thank you, and then I'll let you know if you're a Year 7, 8 or 9 parent where we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. It's a real privilege to be here. I've had 4 sessions today. As was said, just 7, 8, 9 and 10, not in that order. And so we covered a whole heap of different things. The thing that qualifies me the most to be talking about parenting is not academia, but actually the fact that I'm a father and a grandfather. And I think that that's more valuable than any learning, because you've all met people who are really good at learning who are not very good at implementing. Your kids, Generation Alpha, are unlike any other generation in human history. And one of the easiest things to say is that they're digital natives. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit about what there happens in their world and their thinking, but also then give you a whole heap of strategies. But I want to start with the goal of parenting. Some of you will be very pleased to hear this goal, and some of you it might create a little angst. But the goal of parenting is to raise independent, functioning, responsible, healthy adults who leave. All right? And the problem is we've got kids staying home longer and longer. We've got now what's called boomerang kids who leave and come back, and that can happen up to 35. Now, the economic estimates is that every year after 21 that a child stays at your home, it costs you about 8 to 10 grand extra. So it's important that they do leave. Generation Alpha is the first generation to be born in this millennium, and they're shaped by forces and stuff that has never been happened before. So, for example, the development of the iPad happened in their lifetime as a significant thing, and then Instagram and TikTok. And why they are different is because those social media platforms have actually changed a little bit of how interaction happens, and even though the platforms that were there before. So Generation Alpha is the first to actually have parents who were millennials. They're the very first to be shaped by a new millennial. And so what happens is they're shaped by connectivity to the internet, AI, smart devices, autonomous cars, and so much information. And I said to the staff last week, one of the things around this generation is they have access to unprecedented information. And the result is they're less certain about what's accurate and true and what they believe. They're actually more anxious. And the smartwatch picture up there is really important because this generation doesn't believe in a single activity device. You have to have a multiple activity. Who just wants to wear a watch that tells you the time? That's pointless to them. And so what happens is you've got this buzz, speed, interaction, go, 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 that is driven by the devices in their world. They live in an instantaneous world with a computer in their hand. And so they're hyper-connected. They're no longer talking about connectivity with their friends. They're talking about global connectivity. This has changed how they do peer groups. Even for most of you sitting here, is that when you were at school and you got those adolescent years, which are torturous and terrible because there's about so much change and you're trying to discover who you are, is that you try and experiment with a peer group to see if you belong. Well, back in the 70s when I was a teen, there were only a few peer groups, okay? You could be amongst the greasers who are into motorbikes and cars. You could be amongst the surfy dudes, all right? Or you could be against the academic guys, or you could be a jock into sports, and that was about it. Today, if the school doesn't have a peer group that I want to identify with, I just join one online. So you can find all these strange, weird, wonderful, and not so amazing peer groups that our kids can actually belong to and develop these so-called friends that they never meet in real life. They're prisoners to their phones and their devices, and if you've got an adolescent with a phone and you've tried to take it off it, it's like severing a limb. And if you do take it off them, the agony and the screams is like you've severed a limb, isn't it? And what goes with this is instant gratification. This generation has more devices, they have more available cash, they have more opportunity than any other generation before, and the generation the quickest to say, I'm bored. Now, I don't know about you, but I never said I was bored when I was a kid because I'd be given a job. It wasn't a claim to fame, but I hear it all the time, I'm bored. And what they mean by that is, I'm not getting something to stimulate me now. I've got to go for the next bit of stimulation, the next bit of stimulation, the next bit of stimulation. And as I like to say to students who I said to some today, I said, this is more dangerous than a car. And to drive a car, you have to be 16, you have to pass a theory test, you have to do ridiculous amounts of hours of learning to drive, then pass another test, and then you get your Ps. And for that, all they have to do is whinge and complain and say, oh, my friends have got a phone, when am I getting a phone? Oh, I can't talk to my friends after school, I need to be connected. Oh, you're so lame and old school. You know how it goes. If you're hearing those things, take it as a compliment. You're probably doing something good. All right? But this has more potential for harm than driving a car. This connectivity has to be put into a context too, that it's bad news that sells. So we get a picture that the world is a dangerous, scary place because we get bombarded with so much instant information that might not even impact us. So, when the Titanic sunk, news of its sinking took 3 to 5 days to filter through to New York. And people read the newspaper and listened to the radio to get the details. If it happened today, somebody would have filmed it, loaded it up, streamed it, gone viral before they drowned. And so what happens is that we're bombarded by so much information that we can't even get a reference point of it. And that has driven the whole, what is called the culture of safetyism. Because we've got, from digital technology, is that this world is scary, harmful, a dangerous place all the time because we're bombarded with so much. Safetyism, a term coined from the authors of this book, which is a social psychology analysis of what's happening in universities in America that applies to all the West. And they said safetyism is a culture or a belief system in which safety, which includes emotional safety, has become a sacred value, which means that people become unwilling to make trade-offs demanded by other practical or moral concerns. So what happens is that they say there's 3 key things. The first untruth that our young people in this generation is the untruth of fragility, is that, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. The truth is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But we've got this untruth that we're all fragile and we've got to be so careful about trigger warnings and trauma. And I was discussing this just yesterday with somebody and I said, you know, things that once upon a time we would take in our stride as normal part of life, oh no, that's trauma now. To be avoided at all costs because someone might be traumatized. And as somebody who's studied neuroscience, is that what we're doing is we're actually creating a greater fragility and anxiety in young people because there's all this fear around trigger warnings and stuff. The untruth of emotional reasoning, and I'll talk about emotional reasoning. So it's actually thinking with your feelings, which means you have to trust your feelings all the time. And the third untruth is us versus them, that the world is a constant battle between good and evil, and I happen always to be on the good side, and if people disagree with me, they're evil. They're the great untruths, which I'm going to expand on and talk about. So, safetyism is pinned on this, is if I feel unsafe, my subjective feeling, therefore the objective truth is there must be a threat. And I say this all the time to people, where's the threat? Where's the harm? Oh, I feel unsafe. Well, I understand you feel unsafe, but unsafe from what? Where is the harm? Where is the threat? But we don't do that. We just pander to people's emotions because if they feel unsafe, they must be unsafe. What if they're just immature? What if they actually haven't learnt to develop with their emotional life? What if they don't have resilience skills? But we take emotions like they are truth and fact when they're not. Emotions are really important, and we talked today with the students about emotions. And emotions tell us stuff, but not all emotions can be trusted because they move and change all the time. Safetyism is depicted by the movie Leo. Anyone seen Leo? Generally younger kids, you'll see it. This young guy down here in the safety suit, his name's Eli, and Zane, his friend, has come for a play date. He also got the lizard home from school, so his mum's got him in a hazmat suit and the dog in a hazmat suit, because you know what? You might get germs. And he's followed by a drone, because that's the new parenting, drone parenting. Lawnmower parents used to mow everything out of the way. Drone parents just follow 24/7. Here's a really important question, and if you're on staff, you can't answer this one. Which generation of children is safer from harm, abduction and murder? Kids in the 1960s when I was a kid, or kids today? You'll be surprised that kids today are the safest they have ever been in human history. Safest they have ever been statistically is that we are so much more aware as a community. Kids are so much more aware. We've got so many safe places happening. Kids are safer. But if you looked at what's going on in the world, you'd think that it was worse. So what's driven safetyism is 6 social shifts. And I'm going to talk about these and then give you some strategies. The first one is the increase of individualism. The second one is moral relativism. Third one is emotional reasoning and catastrophizing. The fourth one is the politics of offence. The fifth one is digital immersion. And the sixth one is selective reading and watching through social media algorithms. So the rise of individualism is huge, where my rights matter over everything. And I ask people, has anybody heard of the term just discrimination or fair discrimination? It's a philosophical term. And fair discrimination wants to actually balance 2 needs. The need for my independence to be autonomous, but also my need to belong to a community or a connection and a family. And so what happens is you have individualism is about autonomy, collectivism is about attachment. Well, what happens is just discrimination balances those things. That's why we have male and female public toilets. So my right to go to whichever toilet I choose is discriminated against for the benefit of the collective of women. And we've got all these decisions that have been historically made based on good philosophical reasoning, and we're throwing it out. Now, to have good, just discrimination and to balance individualism and collectivism, you actually have to have robust discussion. You have to have civility, which means you can disagree with somebody and still be respectful. We're losing that. Self-regulation, being able to manage my own emotions and not get bent out of shape. And I need to have emotional and psychological maturity. Now, if you're wanting notes and stuff, I will make available the slides. I'll tell you how to get those, and you can get a PDF of the slides. If any slide grabs you, feel free to grab your phone and take a picture. I'm not precious on, it's my stuff, you can't have it. No, I want people to have the resources. Second one is moral relativism. It's about my truth. And I laugh about this one because students going to university and graduating, particularly as teachers, get bombarded with moral relativism, but they always mark 1 + 1 = 2. Now just think about that. Moral relativism says there's no objective truth, it's all your opinion. Whereas in fact, there is lots of objective truths. And we've seemed to throw out those truths, and with that we're throwing out an understanding of consequences. And let me give you one tip that I'm not sure is in the slides. With teenagers, and particularly teenagers boys, your number one goal is to connect choice and natural consequence. So if they do something stupid and come a gutser, your job is to go, guess what? You chose this and that's connected to that. Because if you don't, when they're 18 and they can drink and drive, the consequences can be devastating, life-threatening. So the sooner they learn it, the better. Third point is emotional reasoning and catastrophizing. So emotional reasoning is part of what we call cognitive distortions. There's a whole number of cognitive distortions. So when people get depressed or anxious, their brain doesn't work properly and their thinking patterns change. So for example, any of us who are in the room who have had anxiety, is that you'll start to ruminate. So you get this looping thinking that you can't get rid of. You know, you're just like, you can't switch your brain off. You go, go, go. Then that leads into emotional reasoning where you think with your feelings, and then you catastrophize so that everything becomes the end of the world. And there's no reference point to actually choose. So the short of emotional reasoning is, if I feel guilty, I must be guilty. Or if I feel threatened, I must be at risk. Thinking with our feelings is actually increasing mental unwellness in our culture and amongst young people. And I shared with the staff the stats that happened pre-COVID and COVID. We're in a real crisis amongst our young people. Pre-COVID, 30% increase in diagnosable anxiety disorders amongst young people. Double that in COVID. Eating disorder hospitalisations in Queensland, 1 or 2 per week. During COVID, that was 14 to 16. And the head of adolescent psychiatry, Dr. Steve Stathis, said to me personally, he's a friend, he said, that's not due to COVID, that's because all these things underneath, COVID just took the scab off the sore and it's blown out. The fourth point is the politics of fence. I really love this one. You know, part of my moral relativism, my individualism, is that you cannot offend me. And if I'm offended, you need to change so that I'm not offended. I'm sure you encountered that with people. I loved it when I was lecturing, because I'd have some students going, I'm offended. And I go, I'm offended, you're offended. And then I turn around and keep teaching, and they don't know what to do with that. Because it's like the sacredness of my feelings is that you have to be responsible for how I feel. Oh, suck it up, princess. Get over yourself. This is what's really happening. Let's take peanut allergies. And I'm not talking about people who have serious anaphylactic reactions to allergies. I'm not talking about that group. But with peanut allergies, we became so concerned about it. We can't have it here, can't have it here. And what happened is that there's a whole group of kids and adults who became sensitized to peanuts rather than desensitized. You know, as terrible as it sounds, kids playing in dirt and eating snot and stuff like that is good for their immune system because it actually builds it up. Take that all away and their system becomes fragile, and that's what's actually happening. Digital immersion. This is the really big one. Digital immersion is having a huge impact. And what we're seeing is more and more addiction, screen addiction in digital immersion. So people, the first thing they do in the morning, get up, phone, scroll, free time, scroll, TV's on, scroll. Phone goes, zzz, gotta look at it because I might miss out on something that's immediate. Here's what's actually a summary of some of the research around this. So this is a book that's translated from French. It's a French researcher wrote it, Screen Damage. And he actually talks about kids being exposed. If you have a look up there, all forms of recreational digital consumption, whether it's on smartphones, tablets, game consoles or TVs, have skyrocketed in the younger generation. From the age of 2, children in the West clock up more than 2.5 hours of screen time per day. It's an easy babysitter. If you add up all the time they have, by the time they're 18, that's equivalent to 30 years of school and 15 years of full-time employment. It is huge. And screen management is becoming a really paramount issue because what happens is that the addiction is driven by the drug in our brain called dopamine. Dopamine's a really powerful neurochemical that actually motivates us. And dopamine goes in the direction you feed it. It has got no moral reference point. So for example, the more I do the screen and I get a buzz, dopamine says, do it again. And I'll give you the absolute killer example of this is heroin. Heroin produces massive amounts of dopamine in the brain, and it says to the person, do it again, even though the drug is killing their body. That's the absurdity of it. And digital stuff is that we're having incredible levels of dopamine with digital immersion, and too much dopamine is not good for our brains and bodies. So here's a summary of the research, is that too much dopamine is that the prefrontal cortex, the smart brain, gets dumb. It underperforms. You get easily distracted. You get short attention spans. You get failure to interpret proverbs. You get increased body mass. You get increased obesity. It's all about feelings and sensations and external stimulation. I need that, I need that, I need that, I need that, and I need it now. There's increased recklessness. There's reduced interpersonal skills, reduced empathy, and we're talking about is virtual autism. So people who don't have a neurodiverse brain develop behaviours like someone who's on the autistic spectrum because they've got too much dopamine going on. This is not good. And if I want to give you the epitome of this, look at adult gamers who wear adult nappies so they don't go to the toilet because they might miss an aspect of the game. It's a very real issue. And gaming addiction is becoming a huge issue in the Western world. And one of my students has just completed her master's, and one of her papers was looking at interventions for families with gaming addiction with 14-year-old boys, because it's just rife. So in the brain, Baroness Dr. Professor Susan Greenfield, who is outstanding neuroscience in England, her lab is going to crack probably Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. That's so advanced they are. She talks about the fountains of chemicals in the brain, and these chemicals that are produced in the brain are really important to be in the right balance. In the wrong balance, too much of one, not enough of another, messes up. And in fact, one of the projects I'm doing is looking at all these chemicals. What happens if you have too much or too less? And how do you get the right balance? So the first one, as I mentioned, is dopamine, which is the motivation chemical. So dopamine's all connected to every addiction. Every addiction is about dopamine. Adrenaline, which is the nervous energy. So when you get anxious, you get lots and lots of adrenaline, and when your adrenaline goes up, your dopamine goes up. Cortisol is the chemical that you get with stress. So if you're anxious and your dopamine's up and you're stressed, you produce too much cortisol, and cortisol is toxic to the brain in high levels. Some people may have heard things like adrenal fatigue rather than stress burnout, is that the adrenal system's collapsing because they've had too much cortisol, too much adrenaline, too much dopamine. Then what happens is serotonin, which is the chemical that makes me feel good, that life is blissful and life is good, it diminishes. So what happens is if you drop your levels of serotonin, you're going to get a depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder. And then melatonin, which affects sleep, is that the first place that we see it play out is in sleep patterns. So young kids who are gaming, as soon as their wake-sleep cycles flip, so they want to stay awake gaming all night and sleep during the day, alarm bells. If you've got one of those kids, you need professional intervention straight away, because that is just so hard to break and get their brain right again, because it's all about the chemicals in their brain. It's not just about habits. It's about their changing how their neurophysiology in their body is actually designed to work. So, 6 pretty big shifts that have happened since the invention of the iPhone. That's a pretty relative short space of time. So, let's talk about selective reading, which is all about feedback loops. Now, a little bit of biology here. We talk about positive feedback loops and negative feedback loops. Don't think positive in good and negative in bad. The human body is designed for negative feedback loops. So if you're sitting here and you're feeling a bit cold, is that your body will start to shiver, your skin will get tight, because it's a negative feedback loop. It says you've lost homeostasis, you've lost balance, and you need to get your body warm again. Or if you're sitting and you're feeling a bit hot, is that it's like, oh, I need to take off the jacket or something, same sort of thing. And there is only one positive feedback loop in humanity's body. Anyone know what it is? Giving birth and breastfeeding. So when a woman gives birth, and she breastfeeds, it's a positive feedback loop. So her body says, actually produce more milk, let the areolae open up more, deliver milk to this baby because it's good. That's the only positive feedback in the human body. Now, to understand this is that the human body is made for negative feedback loops which suppress and calm and bring to balance. Positive feedback loops amplify or accelerate. So our bodies are wired for negative feedback loops, but the whole digital marketing world is built on positive feedback loops. So we're getting this extra stimulation that actually wants to feed us up that makes us rev faster. And you know, you've probably had this sort of experience. A number of years ago, Nerily wanted, my wife, she wanted to talk to me about bras. And the next 2 weeks, every ad on my phone was about bras. Oh, I had to go and find how to turn that monitoring microphone off. And how did this play out in social media? Oh, everybody became an expert either for or against because they went to the internet. And then they type in their search engine, or they speak to Siri or Google and give me this information, and the internet says, oh, you're interested in this aspect, we will give you more of that. And you only get one side of the argument. That's not research. And so what happens is that now we've got this digital world that's instantaneous, getting dopamine, going fast, and now we've got programmers determining what we're going to read, what we're going to get across in our phone. Once upon a time, if I went and bought the Sunday paper, you and I would read the same paper. Nobody reads the same paper today. And most of us don't realise that the reading we get is, if we're using digital technology, most times we're not actually choosing a lot of the stuff that comes up on the feed. Because the digital marketers, they're not selling products, they're selling your and my time. They want to focus our eyes to what their marketers want us to look at. So consequently, what happens is we've got this increased accelerating pace, instantaneous. No wonder we're seeing greater levels of anxiety and difficult behaviours with kids. Scary stuff to go when you look at that. So what do we do about it? All right, first thing is, you need to be really clear as a parent that being discomforted or uncomfortable does not equal unsafe. How many people here learnt to drive a manual car? I have to be careful now because it's depending on the age group, all right? So how many of you nailed hill starts the first time you did it? There's always a couple. The rest of us are going like, what? So you're sitting in the car on the hill, your instructor picks the worst hill in the area, you got your foot on the brake, you got your foot on the accelerator, you're holding the handbrake, and you're trying to get it right, and then he says this, check your side mirror, indicate, check your middle mirror. I go, what the hell, do you think I'm good at multitasking? I'm concentrating on this, and now you want me to do this, this, and this, and it is so awkward. But most of us are motivated because we want an end goal, so we put up with the discomfort to reach the goal. So the first thing is that we need to actually really get on the case with our kids. Just because they're uncomfortable doesn't mean it's bad, wrong, or unsafe. It just means that it might be difficult or challenging. My 5-year-old grandson, who we live on the property, we moved up here 3 years ago. He's an outdoorsy boy, and he's the one who's going to crash and burn all the time. So here comes a gutser off his bike. There's tears. I walk over and go, I know it hurts. Benji, it hurts. But this will pass. So let's get up and breathe, and we'll move on, because you're not dying. But if you've got kids, you know the slightest little bit of pain sometimes is the end of the world. They're dying, isn't it? All right. Second thing is, the very discomfort that we're protecting our kids from, the very tension, is essential for their growth. So how do they grow if they don't experience discomfort or tension? Neurologically in the brain, you do not learn anything new unless there's some discomfort or tension. So what we've got to do with our kids is we have to have what's called controllable or tolerable discomfort. And the picture's really intention, because you go on a camp and a high ropes course with a bunch of kids, you know what, you've always got lots of kids who don't want to do it. And some of the kids who overcome their fears and do it, they punch the air afterwards, they celebrate, their mates give them high five because they achieved something that was pretty hard for them to do. You know, they can't do it unless they tolerate the discomfort. But in the world of safetyism, we're eliminating any discomfort. It's not good for our kids. This explains the nervous system. Going into short detail is that from the base of your brain to your tailbone is a group of nerves that are a bit like a bunch of electrical wires wrapped together. And the different branches of the nerves, so one part of the branches of the nerve is the red bit, which is that when you freak out of control, you do fight, flight, you're energized, you have to act. There's all this in your body. The blue one is another branch, is that if that doesn't subside, is that then you go to collapse mode or shutdown mode, and it's like a rabbit in the headlights. You know, you go blank, and you're just like, what do I do? And the green bit is where both those nervous systems are balanced. Now, to have the sweet spot get bigger, you have to have discomfort and tension. If you actually reduce comfort into tension, is the sweet spot of functioning where I can think and feel at the same time. It contracts. And my world that I engage with gets smaller and smaller. So one of the issues with anxiety and depression is that it's a shrinking world. So what happens with people with anxiety is I go somewhere over here, I do that, I feel uncomfortable, so I stop going there. And then sooner or later I go over here and I feel uncomfortable, I stop going there. And I go over here and I feel uncomfortable, and the world just gets smaller and smaller. And the way you have to engage the world is actually by facing things that are uncomfortable. Now here's the beauty. Those dotted lines, 100 beats per minute. This is a really important thing to remember when you're dealing with your kids and your beloved. All right? Is that when you're doing a person-to-person interaction, you've got till your heart rate hits 100 beats that it's tolerable. Once you hit 100 beats per minute, your smart brain switches off, you flip your lid, and anything that comes out of your mouth is nonsense for 20 to 30 minutes. And you might have experienced that in your relationship. I certainly have, where I've walked away, come down and said, oh, that was pretty dumb, and then I've got to go back and apologise. To counteract that, my wife, she's got this look that says, you're flipping your lid, nothing coming out of your mouth is going to be said, so I'm not listening, go away. Just in a glance. So I've learned to go for a walk, because what I want to do is I want to bring my heart rate down so that we can actually wrestle with the tension so that my window can grow. Let me just tackle the tension thing and the trauma thing. Tension is a given. If I have too much tension and I am ripped off with any options, so this is really important. The best way to define trauma is not uncomfortable feelings, but actually a sense that I have no options and I'm in a state of peril. That's trauma. But most people want to reduce trauma, which means they give up on life, they settle for the status quo, and they don't engage. Whereas if I actually learn to embrace tension, then I grow. As parents, your job is to help your children to embrace tension. But don't expect them to say, oh, Dad, thank you for the enlightenment. Doesn't work that way, does it? It's only when they become adults, like my daughter, who's 35, who had a conversation with Mum the other day, and she said, oh, little snot wanted to lie to me. He thought he could get away with it. And her mum just smiled. And she said, oh yeah, I get it now. Emotional regulation is really important. So learning to actually manage my emotions and let my emotions ebb and flow is really essential for growth. So I want to give you a diagram. This diagram is for the men, okay? I developed this one for the blokes, okay? So most blokes are taught to put on a suit of armour, which I call emotional constipation, okay? So what we want to do is we don't have any feelings. Well, we do. We just don't talk about it because we're not given the language. And what happens is we wear our suit of armour, we climb into bed, my beloved sees my heartbeat, but she can't get at it because there's armour going on. I shared this with a engineer who was a fitter and turning engineer, and he smiled And he said, armour-plated, double-plated, welded, no seams, gyprock in the middle. I said back to him, I bet you if I started grinding my way, you'd weld it up quicker than I could cut. He smiled. I had him then. He was engaged. On the other end is the emotional tsunami, which is emotional diarrhea. This is where I'm overrun by emotions. Everything is just bigger than Ben-Hur. It's all crazy. Everything's about emotions. I can't reason. The place of maturity is in the middle, and it's like a big tree that puts down solid roots in the ground that can deal with the storms of life, and I'm able to think and feel and process simultaneously. It's not all thinking, it's not all feeling, but I can actually go, yeah, I'm feeling this, let me just do a check and see if this is accurate, what's going on here. And that's emotional maturity. And unfortunately, safetyism is robbing our kids emotional maturity, because they don't have to deal with knocking bark off or doing challenging things. So they need to learn how to think and feel at the same time, and that's being able to regulate themselves and manage themselves. Here's a really important thing. Emotions are impacted by three main things. So what goes on in my body, what goes in my brain, and what goes on in my environment determines my emotions. Hence why emotions are variable and can change. And emotions do tell me things, but they're not always to be trusted, because, you know, you can go and watch a movie and one moment you're crying and the next moment you wish that the villain was getting it. Because music and sensory stuff plays in this all the time. Whereas behaviour, we've got to teach our kids to actually use their brain, and that it's about how they think, and it's about their choices, irrespective of how they feel. And sometimes it's the parent's right to go, I don't care if you don't like it. It's good for you. I have, excuse me. I have that with my 7-year-old grandson regularly at the moment, but I don't like it. Well, suck it up, princess. It's good for you. It's funny because he'll throw tantrums and I say, mate, didn't work with your mum, not going to work with you. Go talk to your mum about it. You're too hard. Right? Well, I'm not going to be manipulated by a 7-year-old. Because as a grandparent, my job is to help his parents, for him to grow up to become an independent, functioning adult who's responsible and mature and leaves home. That's part of my job. So, the fountains of chemicals I talked about, and what I want to talk about is I want to give you a framework for some strategies. Now, I've got so many strategies on this that it'll have your head spinning. So what I want you to do is what grabs you, hold on to that, and you can get the PowerPoints. Dr. John Arden, well-known psychologist and neuroscience, John came up with what he calls the SEEDS factor for well-being, and he said these are the things, if you want to live a balanced, healthy life, this is what you need to do. So the first S is social interactions. Second, the E is exercise or physical movement. Don't think of going to the gym, think of movement. We have reduced our amount of movement because we've got remote controls for this, or we touch our watch and the gate opens or whatever. We've reduced our movement. Education. I'm not talking about formal education. I'm talking about learning new things. Incredible study in Japan where they asked 80-year-olds to sign up for the study. Half the group became the control group. The other half had to learn something new. They gave permission for their brains to be autopsied when they died. All the people who did nothing, their brains shrank, atrophied. All the ones who learnt something new had new brain growth at 80. The myth that you can't teach old dogs new trick, it's a myth. It's good for us to keep learning new things. Diet. So diet has two components. One is physical diet, the second one is digital diet, and then the last one is sleep. And I'm going to give you a whole heap of suggestions on these. So buckle up and here we go. So, make bedrooms no technology zones. At bedtime, all technology's got to be out of the bedroom. And when your kid says, you don't trust me, you go, no, I trust you, I just don't trust your idiot mates who will text you at 2 in the morning when you're supposed to be asleep. Make it about their friends. The best thing you can do is have a charging station that you put all devices, including yours, on and lock. My 7-year-old grandson was busted the other night, he had been on his iPad for 5 hours when he should have been sleeping. You think he got in trouble? You bet. He thought I could sneak out and get my iPad and I'll keep just watching what I like watching. Have sit-down family meal. Just here, if you want to change one thing for the outcome of your kids, sit down at a dinner table, traditional meal 3 times a week, minimum. Your kids will have better behaviour at school. They'll actually become more socially engaged with you. They will perform better academically at school, just by having a traditional dinner, because you sit at a table, you have a discussion and a conversation, you interact, no distractions. But most of us are so busy that we actually don't do dinners well. If you want to reverse digital immersion, you have to increase sequencing activities. Sequencing activities take over time. So, growing a veggie garden, picking your vegetables, washing your vegetables and using them in your meal is a sequencing activity. Buying food, preparing food is good because it actually gets your digestive juices going. You eat together, you clean up together. That's a sequencing activity. Digital technology has robbed us sequencing activities because we go for the fast option because it's easy. Have no technology night once a week, play board games. One of my mates tried this. He said his teenage kids went kicking and screaming, and at the end of the night said, "Can we do that again?" Got to keep the goal in mind. Take your kids on dates and ask them what they want to do. The most important thing that as dads is that we can take our sons and daughters on dates, but not what we want to do. We want to ask them what they want to do, and what they're into, we need to get into. Because that builds a really good connection. Encourage your children to have friends over to do a planning encourage your children to have friends over to do planned activities. And what you need to do is, if you do play dates, let there be free play. Don't structure everything. Free play is essential to building civility skills because you have to negotiate rules. You have to deal with when rules are broken. There's a whole heap of skills in free play that are so important that kids are losing. Volunteer as a family to give back to the community. Find joy and laughter every day. Laughter reduces stress and anxiety. Have something funny. Sign up for a joke page. Dads, sign up for a dad's joke page. You know, they'll roll their eyes, but they'll appreciate it. Okay? Schedule regular virtual time with loved ones who are not in your household. So if your family's a long way away, use technology for connection. But schedule it. My grandkids love talking to my wife's mum, to their nana. They just love those times when they do video calls. Create a gratitude jar. Encourage everyone to put a note in the jar each day that's something they're grateful for, and then take time to read it. Gratitude changes how the brain works. Self-compassion changes how the brain works. Give your kids a list of indoor chores and then join them in it. Plant a garden together. Movement is really, really, really important. Primitive man walked 16 kilometres a day. They ate according to the seasons. They slept according to the sun. They didn't have electricity to actually stay up all night, and I'm feeling hungry, I'll just jump in the car and maybe I'll duck down to Johnson Road and go to Macca's or Hungry Jack's and pick up a feed. No, it didn't work that way. So movement is really, really important. So, play an active video game. Get outside with your kids and play with them. And, you know, kids need at least 60 minutes daily physical activity. Are your kids getting that? 60 minutes of activity. Plan family activities that get everyone moving, such as biking or throwing a frisbee, shooting hoops, soccer. Do something at least once a week. Get outside and connect with nature. Go on a family hike, go camping without technology. We have bonfires. The kids can't wait for it to cool down because we have a bonfire every week in our big fire pit, and there's no devices. We sit around the fire, we talk, we engage. Throw a frisbee, cook your footy, play tug of war. During commercial breaks between Netflix episodes, get up and do something. Maybe do a competition of burpees or star jumps or whatever. Here's a brain scan of 2 brains. This brain's been sitting quietly, and less colour, so more reds means more blood flow in the brain and more activity. This is somebody 20 minutes after a brisk walk. Their brain's alert, active, sharp. Here's the difficult thing about movement and exercise. Nobody gets motivated to do exercise until you've done it. You only get motivated afterwards. It really sucks, I reckon. And you do it and you feel good for it 40 minutes later because your body is flooded with all this brain stuff, but you're also flooded with what is called the opiate-based chemicals, endorphins and enkephalins, which make you feel good. And they're good for us. Education. So make a list of activities you'd like to try together and hang somewhere as a family and can see and research and plan. Like going on a holiday, getting your kids to plan about the holiday. And then, you know, these are the things we're going to learn about. Learning new things is very, very important. I got to tell you, I had a great learning experience because when we moved up here to Glasshouse, I bought a little Kubota tractor. I knew nothing about Kubota tractors. I know everything about them now. That's one thing that YouTube's really good. I know how to service it. I know everything about it. It's fantastic. Things that I didn't even know before. Right? Because I just decided I was going to learn about a Kubota. Now I'm actually building a couple of bits of machinery that I know nothing about, but I'm learning. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, I've still learned something. As a family, intentionally introduce new activities for learning and fun, like card games and board games. Introduce new activities at special celebrations. So origami for table decorations, make old-fashioned Christmas decorations, menu, making cards in different languages. The boys did KFC at home recently. So they love popcorn chicken, and they said to Granny, can we do popcorn chicken on Friday nights when we eat together? And she found a recipe, so they did a drawing of KFC, put it on the door. They had a menu. They came around and asked for the order. And then, you know, Benji, who's starting prep, who's 5, he said, enjoy your food. Read together. This should be in bold and repeated several times. One of the most important things you can do is read, read, and read, and read, and read with your kids. You want to help your kids learn at school, reading is the key. Absolute key. Ben Carson, who stood for pre-selection at an election a while ago in the US, Dr. Ben Carson is a famous neurosurgeon. He and his brother grew up with a single mum, African-American, and his mum would take him to the library every week, and they had to read a book and write a report on it. And what they didn't know was their mum couldn't read, but she put ticks and crosses all over their papers. And they learn about the world, and their world expanded, and he is now a world-renowned neuroscience brain surgeon. Isn't that amazing? Just from reading. When we actually learn new things, what happens is that we increase in our brain dendrites. So this is a nerve. So on one end here, you've got this nerve ending, and then you've got this long bit called the axon of the cell body and the dendrites. So when we make neural pathways, what happens is the nerve ending on the bottom here connects to a dendrite here, and then it travels along. And what happens is that it's chemical and electrical mechanisms that happen in the brain. And what happens is learning new things develops new dendrites in your brain. Literally, you can change your brain by learning new things. And if you're not a big reader, that doesn't mean you're confined. A lot of blokes I work with are not readers, but you know what? They're learning new things. They're hanging out with blokes and learning things. I'm a mad keen surf fisherman, and I take some blokes up to Fraser Island who have never been surf fishing, and they get addicted. And so they want to learn knots and this and what gear they've got to buy, and they're learning new things all the time. Diet. So this is a really important one. Make sure your kids eat breakfast every day. Don't let your kids go without breakfast. Most important meal of the day. It actually kicks in their metabolism, feeds their brain and their energy cells. Roster each child to assist with cooking once a week, so it's a good sequencing activity. Gradually substitute unhealthy fuel for healthier ones, so replace soft drink and fruit juice without added sugar. Look at what's going on in the diet. And what we want to do is we want to actually make our guts work better by eating more complex carbohydrates rather than processed simple carbohydrates. So what happens is that there's a correlation between gut health and brain health. If you get sick in the gut, you get sick in the brain. So what happens is we've got a lot of kids today who are very fickle, lazy eaters, and their gut is literally not working enough. And because they've got terrible, terrible diets, and we need to actually reduce the sugars and the processed food. Experiment with new and different foods. And experiments are great because, I'll go back on that slide, because experiments are meant to pass or fail. So if it fails, so what? You learn something. So experiment. More on diet. Eat fish that contains beneficial omega-3s. And if you're not a fish oil, make sure you take omega-3 fish oils. Very, very important to the brain. Reduce excessive calories, simple carbohydrates, processed food and saturated fats. So more what we call rainbow foods, fruits, salads, nuts, grains, things that your body's got to break down. Increase complex carbohydrates, periodic fasting. This is something that's really profound. The research now around longevity in life actually involves fasting, because when you actually fast, it actually causes changes in your body that are actually really healthy. That causes you to actually process stuff better and clean up your system. The problem is that we have so much food available that we're actually eating too much and eating ourselves to death as a society. Sleep. Now, I put this QR code. We're not going to watch the video. You can look at the video, or when you get the notes, I've got it both there. So the QR code takes you. It's a great video, a TED talk by Claudia Greer about what happens if you don't get enough sleep. Sleep is paramount. In fact, it's so important. In the most recent work of John Arden's, he switched the S's around, so he starts with sleep, not having sleep at the end. He has it first. And as somebody who does counselling and psychotherapy, is that the first thing you can tell about the early onset of mental health stuff is sleep changes. So insomnia, hypersomnia, too much sleep, early morning wakings, and people are not getting the right quantity and quality of sleep. So sleep works that there's 4 stages of sleep. You actually have to get through all 4 stages, and then you get the right to dream. And what happens is there's 3 things happening in the body. One is that the first stages is getting rid of dead cells and dead chemicals and toxic chemicals in your brain. It detoxes. The second thing it does, it processes what's happened for the day, which is what happens in dreaming, whether we're aware of it or not. And then what happens is neurogenesis, where we produce new cells in the brain and new chemicals, but also our body cells heal. And we're seeing more and more sleep disorders happening, and people actually correlate with their health. Is that if you have bad sleep patterns, you will actually compromise your health. So, aim for an early bedtime. And with your kids, you just have to negotiate that this is the time that we prepare for bed. Give yourself half an hour to an hour, and then it's bedtime. And you have to train your kids to have good sleep. So you want to make their bedroom the place they sleep, not the place they do homework or lie on their bed using their device. Get them out of their bedroom. Get in the habit is that their bed and their pillow is for sleep. Create spaces to pay off sleep debt. Now, this is really important. For those of you who've got some teens, particularly a little bit older teens, is that you get to the weekend, and they just want to sleep all day. Or they get to holidays and they want to sleep. What they're doing is paying back a sleep debt, because teens still need about 8 to 10 hours sleep. Most of them are not getting that. And if you don't pay off your sleep debt, you pay it off with premature aging or health. Increase self-regulation skills, so breathing techniques to slow down, plan and maintain buffer time, so having space. We're too busy, so we go from this event to this event, okay, it's bedtime, kids, and then they're in bed and they're not even wound down or disengaged from the day. Good sleep requires a bored brain. Let me say that again. Good sleep requires a bored brain. So the hour before bed, your mission is to bore yourself to death. Don't stimulate with screens. Switch off the noggin. Get bored. You won't have any problem sleeping because the brain says, this is boring. I'm going to go to sleep. Make sleep an essential, non-negotiable in the house, that we actually develop and keep good sleep patterns. So here's a couple of summaries around sleep. Sleep is not an optional extra. It's actually core. It's essential. Less than 6 hours regularly causes significant impairment, increases heart rate, strokes, and Alzheimer's. So you want to really knock your health around. Be one of those who don't sleep well. Sleep medications generally don't help in the long term, because what they do is you only get on stage 1 or 2 sleep and that's it. You don't get regenerative sleep. Avoid things that hinder sleep. Caffeine. Now all you caffeine addicts out there, I'll put my hand up too. I like coffee. I have a very expensive coffee machine. I've tested all the local coffee bean suppliers around. I've narrowed down which is good and which is rubbish. And I have 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day and nothing after midday. Caffeine, half-life, to get half the caffeine out of your system is 6 hours. So if you have coffee at 4 o'clock, you've still got half the caffeine in your system by 10, you're not going to sleep well. And just as a sideline, marijuana stays in the system for several days. Negative sleep thoughts and anxiety disrupt sleep. Body temperature impacts good sleep. The ideal sleeping temperature is not Queensland. The ideal sleeping temperature is 19 degrees. People go, oh, that's too cold. No, it's doesn't matter if you've got a blanket on, whatever, 19 degrees is the ideal temperature. Diet and exercise contribute to healthy sleep, but you've got to do it earlier. You don't do it before bed. Because if you do exercise and eat before you go to bed, you're actually stimulating your system. So, how do you go forward from this? I've bombarded you with a heap of info. 1, work on changing one thing at a time. Choose whatever's the easiest for you to change. You're on a mission. You've got to change you with that one thing, and then you change the household. And when you've got victory on that, then you go, okay, what's the next thing? And you give yourself a mission to say over 6 to 12, 18 months, I'm going to do some transformation here, but I'm going to start with the easiest thing, and I'm going to expect kids to kick and scream because that's their job. Their job is to make our life difficult as parents. And our job is to help them to grow up to become independent, functioning adults who leave. 2, once you get some traction, introduce one more. And if you find you're struggling to get the family on board, then shift your focus and make it about your journey and just keep doing it yourself. Change that one thing. And eventually, people will notice things and you'll be surprised how they come on board. And remember, this is about your family's future. This is about your kids' future. And unfortunately, some of the old school approaches to life when I was a kid in the 60s have been totally lost to our detriment as people and as a society. And we're going to see more and more of this research emerging and talking about very simple things that were once common sense that are no longer common sense. Change is possible, okay? But it's hard work. And as I said, it involves discomfort. So I don't expect your kids to say thank you. I remember talking about this at a school, and a mum and dad came to me and they said, we have used technology as a babysitter. And they said, this is going to be really hard to turn around. And I said, yep. And I said, and if you don't turn it around, what's the alternative? So actually being able to work with our kids and bring change is really, really important. Like I said, I'll make the PowerPoints available for you so that you've got all that information. And I wish you well on the journey of implementation and change with kids that resist it big time. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Peter. We We're squeezing time a little bit here, but I know your presentation was really valuable. So if we have a few questions from the audience, we could probably squeeze those in and have our year-level our meetings after that in about 10 minutes. And then after that, Peter will be in the foyer if you want to speak to him and ask a few further questions. But if there are a few questions now, we could probably pop them in, if that's okay.
Yeah, and if I'm happy to hang around for a while and answer questions as well. So I've given you a lot to think about. And any questions? Okay, if you want a good recommendation for screen time, Google the American Pediatric Association, and they actually have a list of recommended screen times per age group, based on research. All right. Pediatrics Association. I should have put it in the slide, but they've got a great recommendation. And it's really hard. So the difference, my oldest grandson, he loves technology. He's a creative kid. He just loves watching kids' YouTube. I was sharing with Jax about a house on the hill that he just loves. So it's actually it's a program that's a kids program about a farmhouse, an actual working farm. He just loves it. And one day he came to me and said, "Granny, can we buy an incubator? I want to hatch some chickens." And so he's learning good stuff, but that's his easy go-to. Whereas his brother's easy go-to is, let me go outside and run around. So different kids are going to be different wrestles. But the American Pediatric Association has some really good recommendations. Great question, thank you. Yep. Technically, yes. And as a sideline issue here, a whole heap of parents from Microsoft started a school that was screen-free because they said our kids get plenty of screen time at home. And part of what we've got to do as parents is we actually have to teach our kids two things. One, self-censorship. And two, delaying gratification. That's an old school concept. You eat the things you don't like on your plate first so you can eat the bits you like. Delaying gratification is a very important skill. And so again, even if school time comes into that, you might want to give some recreational time, negotiate and sit what's comfortable with you. All right?
Probably one for a few of the other parents is a little bit off topic, but with the proliferation of the different kind of messaging platforms that are out there, there are some that are just deeply inappropriate for young children to be on. One of the big things that we struggle with in our household is some parents don't really see that as an issue, particularly to Snapchat. It is an 18-plus program, but there are plenty of 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds that are wandering around, and there is just no way to police that. Is there any kind of strategies to help mitigate that social isolation that some children may feel, and how to crack these peer groups to say, hey, this platform is not good, and maybe as a group we should pull back, and how to have that discussion with other parents?
Yeah, I think that's a hard one. I think you have to sometimes have a discussion, sometimes you have to just draw a hard line boundary, and sometimes you actually create an alternative. So one of the things that we did with our kids is that we did a lot of water skiing and camping and fun activities, and they'd invite friends, and because their friends had never done that, and they were blown away. So to create a countercultural experience for the kids to go, this is what we're doing. But I think it's a matter of just saying, no, you can't do that for this reason. Brett Lee, not the cricketer, is a retired police officer from Task Force Argus. He runs Internet Safe Education, Internet Safe Families. His webpage is my go-to because he does a review of every new app that comes up. And then he actually talks about how to manage kids with settings on the phone. All right? And there's some really good technology. The problem is that they're more technology savvy than we are. You know, I think I said in the promo is that these kids use devices before they can read or write. So we've got to teach them that this is a tool to be used and this is how you use it. So there's sometimes you just got to go, no, not appropriate, not on. And for my daughters, you know, my oldest daughter, whose husband teaches here in the school, she was teaching, and I think she was 23, and she came and said, Dad, I can take over ownership of my phone now. And the reason I had ownership of her phone was because it was my phone and I can take it away. All right? I don't believe in letting kids their phone. It's my phone. But the fact is I still wanted that control to be able to go while she was a teen, and just kept going because she thought, oh, I'm on a wicket here, Dad's going to pay it. And then she decided, oh, I want a bit of freedom. I'll take it over. So there are strategies you can use that would be helpful. Okay?
All right, thank you very much, Peter. I am going to have to wrap it up because we have our other meetings now. Thank you all for coming tonight, and Peter is going to be in the foyer if you would like to just ask him some more questions. If you're a Year 7 parent, if you'd like to remain in the hall auditorium here. If you're a Year 8 parent, Mrs. Douglas will be down past the back of the stage in the drama room. And if you're a Year 9 parent and would like to meet with Mr. Pienaar, he'll be up the steps in the very first class in the top of the steps. And thank you all. I hope you've had lots of good things to think about as you go on your parenting journey. Have a good night. Big clap for Peter.